that break down your page into a grid. Usually it's 960 pixels wide because that happens to fit nicely into the iPad and the smallest common screen, which is 1024 pixels wide. And then within that, it splits it into columns. And it's 12 columns, it's 16 columns, it doesn't matter. The important thing is that you're designing for a grid. And it's inherently pretty. It's inherently easy. We have something in our brain that makes it. We identify the grid. Even if you're not drawing lines around, boxes or whatever, your eyes will see the grid. This is just some random site from the portfolio of 960, which is my favorite framework because it doesn't actually add anything more. It's just the grid. And you can obviously see that this is broken down into these grid-like sections along columns. Here it's a 12-column layout. And when you break down the layout, this is really the layout. And this is not that hard. You can sit down with pencil and paper and sketch something out and say, I'm going to have, I have the nav at the top. I'm going to have, my most important, latest item, or here's what we are, here's what we do, or this is the top dashboard, the most important information to display up in these big chunks on the top, and a little bit of separator and maybe some, I don't know what they put there. Yeah, you are here. They actually put their kind of like a little bit of a nav further down. And then these like secondary content blocks along the bottom, and there's even more if you scroll off the bottom of the page. So this is a really easy way for you to do layout without breaking a sweat. Coming up with a truly unique layout and doing custom classes and stuff, it's possible. It's a lot of work. It's a lot easier to screw up. Again, easier return on investment. Go with a grid, and definitely start out with pencil and paper. It's easier than you think. All you need to know what to do is how to draw a box. You can actually download templates that have these grid lines drawn on them. So just sit there with the pencil and paper and like draw a box or cut up little pieces of paper and shuffle them around so that it gives you like a little bit of a sense. It actually, there's something about the tactile aspect that makes it work better for me. Might not be for everyone. That you can get a feel for how a design will look later on screen, like how big should I make this box, this content area. So yeah. Okay, so we've covered how to use how to create a visual hierarchy. But the reality is that once you've got a site up there, most of the site's content is going to be text, unless you're doing something really special, a site that's mostly images, or I don't know. So yeah, use good typography. And most people, when you hear about typography, they're like, oh, so that means I need to use good fonts. No. Typography is not just about good fonts, even though it's also about fonts. You can choose beautiful fonts that reflect the tone of your website, but it's not just that. Typography is about presenting textual information, and there's actually a lot of it on the web, and there's a lot of history. Typography has been done for a long time. Gutenberg was, almost 600 years ago. We've learned a few lessons about how to lay out, printed matter on a page to make it easier for humans to process it. Sadly, a lot of the things that we learned kind of got forgotten when we moved to the web because typesetting on computers in the 80s and 90s was not awesome. And only now are we really sort of starting to catch up. Now, all of a sudden, there's web fonts, there's better control over type in the browser, CSS3 adds a lot of things that are nice. But yeah, typography is the clothes in which you dress your words. And there's a lot of do's and don'ts that have evolved over time. Just like, when you wear clothes, you're not going to wear like stripes with plaid or something like that. So don't make those mistakes with typography. And here's a greatest hits list of what not to do. There's a much longer list of what yes to do, but I'm just going to give a link to some sites that give you those things. These are really the things that bother me most when I look at websites and they make your site less readable. And the number one, with a bullet, at the top of the greatest hits list of bad typography is not giving your lines enough room to breathe. By default, browsers set type what's called solid, which is basically a line spacing of 1. And it's bad. I have a hard time reading it because there's not enough space between lines. I feel like, the line above and the line below are crowding into the line I'm reading. You give it a little bit more space, all of a sudden it's a lot easier for your eye to track along the line. And that's really the core act of reading. It's your eye moving, right to left or left to right, whatever language you're reading, along the line that you're reading. And anything that interferes with that is bad. And so this is one thing you can do to fix that. Just as a general rule of thumb, you want to give your type spacing equivalent to 1.3, 1.5 to 2 ems, where ems is a relative measure. It's actually the width of an uppercase M, and this is a convention dating back to Gutenberg. So it's like, if your font has really narrow characters, then it'll be proportional to that character, and it's good to have proportion. Right. So that's line height. The next problem with most people's type, really, really wide columns. It's bad because if you try reading the stuff along the top, see if you start in the middle somewhere, just jump in the middle, and then keep going, and see if you have an easy time staying on the same line as you move from right to left. There's actually a rule of thumb for this as well. And the rule of thumb is 2 alphabets. You should make your content 2 alphabets wide, roughly. It makes it a lot easier to read because your eye won't get lost. Oh, crap, I'm in the middle of the paragraph. Was I here? Here? Okay, now I have to look. You just have to concentrate more, and you don't want people to concentrate when they're processing your information. You want them to concentrate on how awesome you are or whatever it is that you're selling. So yeah, this is stuff that gets in the way. Another problem is small type. Wilson Miner has a great post about this. Wilson Miner is an awesome designer. He did Apple.com, and he's also Django's resident design guru, awesome whatever. He actually did a really good post on relative readability. The reality is that we don't read our computer screens at the same distance that we read books. And books are often set in 12-point type. It's kind of like a standard. Newspapers are often set in 12-point type. But we read a newspaper this far away from us, and we read the computer this far away from us. So it's a lot smaller at that distance. You actually want to up the size of your type on screen to make it the same size as the type you're reading. And I know you're thinking oh man, that means that my pages will be a lot longer. People know how to scroll now. It's not as bad as it used to be where people would never scroll. They'll keep reading if your content is interesting. So yeah, and here's the photo that Wilson gave, for example. That's 16-point type on his screen, and that's 12-point type in a magazine, and you can see that they're actually pretty equivalent given the distance that you hold it at. So make your type large, give it room to breathe. Make your type large, give it room to breathe. What was the third thing? I totally forgot. Oh well. Oh no. Fail. Yes, make your type large. Browsers by default actually do default to 16 pixels. It's just most reset style sheets bump that down to 12 for no good reason, or 10 even, which is even worse. And finally, the cardinal sin of people who are oh my God, fonts. Yeah, this is awful. Don't do it, please. 2 to 3 typefaces at most. You use too many different typefaces, it just becomes like a ransom note. It doesn't look so awesome. So 2 to 3 typefaces. You can actually pair typefaces. There are typefaces that work well together. Kind of the default is to use sans serif for titles and serif for body text. That's because at smaller sizes, the serifs help us actually make out the shape of each letter. And studies show that we just process serifs faster. And sans serifs just look better at what's called display sizes, large. So make your title sans serif like a Helvetica, or if you're on Windows, Arial. And your body, Georgia. Georgia is a lovely, lovely font. Thank God for Georgia. Otherwise, we'd really be well and truly fucked. And there's a very long list of things you can do to class up your website.